Esther, the queen who risked everything to save her people. Esther 1-10 KJV. Have you ever wondered if God can use one ordinary person to change the course of history? Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing seemed dangerous? The story of Esther is one of courage, faith, and God's providence working behind the scenes. Although God's name is never directly mentioned in the book of Esther, his hand can be seen throughout the entire story. A king seeks a new queen. The story begins during the reign of King Ahasuerus, who ruled over a vast empire stretching from India to Ethiopia. Esther 1:1 KJV. The king held a great feast for his princes, nobles, and servants. Esther 1:3-4 KJV. During the celebration, he commanded Queen Vashti to appear before the guests to display her beauty. Esther 1:10-11 KJV. But Queen Vashti refused. The king became angry, and after consulting his advisors, he removed Vashti from her position as queen. Esther 1:12-19 KJV. Soon afterward, a search began throughout the empire for a new queen. Little did anyone know that God's plan was already unfolding. Esther is chosen. In the capital city of Shushan lived a Jewish man named Mordecai. Esther 2:5 KJV. Mordecai had raised his cousin Esther because she had lost her parents. Esther 2:7 KJV. The Bible describes Esther as beautiful and kind. When the king's servants searched for young women to bring before the king, Esther was taken to the palace. Esther 2:8 KJV. Before she went, Mordecai instructed her not to reveal that she was Jewish. Esther 2:10 KJV. After many months of preparation, Esther appeared before King Ahasuerus. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. Scripture tells us, "And the king loved Esther above all the women." Esther 2:17 KJV. The king placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen. A young Jewish orphan had become queen of the most powerful empire in the world. Mordecai uncovers a plot. One day, while serving near the king's gate, Mordecai overheard two officials plotting to assassinate the king. Esther 2:21-22 KJV. Mordecai informed Esther. Esther reported the matter to the king in Mordecai's name. The plot was investigated, confirmed, and recorded in the Royal Chronicles. Esther 2:23 KJV. At the time, Mordecai received no reward. But God was preparing something important: the rise of Haman. The king promoted a man named Haman and commanded everyone to bow before him. Esther 3:1-2 KJV. But Mordecai refused. This angered Haman. When Haman learned that Mordecai was Jewish, his hatred grew beyond one man. He decided he wanted to destroy all the Jewish people throughout the empire. Esther 3:5-6 KJV. Haman persuaded the king to sign a decree ordering the destruction of every Jew in the kingdom on a specific day. Esther 3:8-13 KJV. The decree was sent throughout the empire. Fear spread among God's people. The situation seemed hopeless. Mordecai challenges Esther. When Mordecai learned about the decree, he mourned deeply and sent a message to Queen Esther. Esther 4:1-8 KJV. He urged her to go before the king and plead for her people. But there was a problem. Anyone who approached the king without being invited could be put to death unless the king extended his golden scepter. Esther 4:11 KJV. Esther was afraid. Yet Mordecai sent one of the most famous messages in Scripture. "For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4:14 KJV. Mordecai believed God had placed Esther in the palace for a purpose. Esther's courageous decision. Esther made her choice. She instructed Mordecai to gather the Jews and fast for 3 days. Esther 4:16 KJV. Then she declared, "And so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16 KJV. These words have inspired believers for centuries. Esther was willing to risk her life to save others. Esther approaches the king. After the 3 days of fasting, Esther entered the king's court. Esther 5:1 KJV. The king saw her. To Esther's relief, He extended the golden scepter. She was spared. The king asked what she desired and promised to grant her request. Esther 5 verses 2-3, KJV. Instead of immediately revealing Haman's plot, Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Esther 5 verse 4, KJV. At the banquet, she invited them to a second banquet the next day. Meanwhile, Haman's pride continued to grow. He even built gallows 75 feet high to execute Mordecai. Esther 5 verse 14, KJV. But God was already working behind the scenes. The king's sleepless night. That night, the king could not sleep. Esther 6 verse 1, KJV. He ordered the royal records to be read aloud. As the records were read, the king discovered that Mordecai had once saved his life by exposing an assassination plot. The king realized Mordecai had never been rewarded. Esther 6 verses 2-3, KJV. At that very moment, Haman entered the palace intending to request Mordecai's execution. Instead, the king asked Haman, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Esther 6 verse 6, KJV. Thinking the king meant him, Haman suggested a grand public honor. Then the king replied, "Make haste, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew." Esther 6 verse 10, KJV. The man Haman hated most was publicly honored by Haman himself. God's plan was unfolding perfectly. Haman's downfall. At Esther's second banquet, the king again asked what she desired. Esther 7 verse 2, KJV. This time Esther revealed the truth. She explained that a decree had been issued to destroy her people. Then she identified Haman as the enemy behind the plot. Esther 7 verses 3-6, KJV. The king was furious. When he learned the full extent of Haman's actions, he ordered Haman to be executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. Esther 7 verses 9-10, KJV. The enemy's plan had turned against him. Deliverance for God's people. Although the original decree could not be revoked, the king issued a new decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves. Esther 8 verse 11, KJV. When the appointed day arrived, God's people were preserved. Their enemies were defeated. Esther 9 verses 1-5, KJV. What had begun as a day of destruction became a day of victory. The Feast of Purim. To remember God's deliverance, Mordecai established the Feast of Purim. Esther 9 verses 20-22, KJV. This celebration reminded future generations that God can turn sorrow into joy and danger into victory. Lessons from Esther's story. Esther's story teaches us that God is always at work, even when we cannot see him. It reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what is right despite fear. The story also teaches us that God places people in specific situations for specific purposes. Like Esther, we may not always understand why God has positioned us where we are, but he sees the bigger picture. Finally, Esther reminds us that one faithful person can make an enormous difference. Her courage saved an entire nation. Recommended resource. If you'd like to study Esther's story and other Bible accounts more deeply, consider using a KJV study Bible with commentary and cross-references. A good study Bible can help you understand the historical background, key themes, and deeper lessons found throughout Scripture. If you had been in Esther's position, would you have had the courage to approach the king? Let us know in the comments below.